The siren's wail cut through the morning silence like a blade through flesh, and I was already running before my feet hit the cold concrete. My son Jake lay crumpled on our kitchen floor, his face the color of old newspaper, one hand clutching his chest like he was trying to hold his heart inside his body. 22 years old, and the kid was having his second heart attack. The first one nearly killed him 3 months ago. This one might finish the job. "Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the approaching ambulance. I can't breathe." His eyes were wide with the kind of terror that comes when you realize your body is betraying you. I'd seen that look before, in Afghanistan, on the faces of soldiers who knew they weren't going home. But this was my boy, my only boy. The paramedics were maybe 30 seconds out when I saw her, Karen Whitmore, all 5'0" of her, standing in the middle of my driveway like some demented traffic cop. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and she wore that navy blue jacket with a Homeowner Association logo that she treated like a badge of authority. Her Honda was parked sideways across my driveway entrance, blocking the ambulance's path like a cork in a bottle. I ran outside, my bare feet slapping against the asphalt, and I could see the ambulance driver's confusion as he pulled up to the street. Karen was gesturing wildly, pointing at some invisible property line, her voice carrying across the morning air like fingernails on a chalkboard. "This is corporate property. You cannot park emergency vehicles on Homeowner Association regulated zones without proper documentation." The paramedic, a young guy with tired eyes and 3 days of stubble, rolled down his window. "Ma'am, we have a cardiac emergency. We need access to that house immediately." "I don't care if the president himself is dying," Karen shot back, her face flushed with the kind of righteous anger that only comes from having too much power and too little sense. "Rules are rules. This gentleman," she pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal, "has been violating association guidelines for months. No emergency services until we verify his compliance status." I felt something snap inside my chest, like a guitar string wound too tight. "Karen, my son is dying. Move your car, now." My voice came out steady, but underneath it was a current of violence that surprised even me. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thompson? Because I'm documenting this entire interaction for the association board." Behind her, I could see faces appearing in windows up and down the street. Mrs. Chen from next door, the Parkinsons from across the way, even old Charlie Peterson, who never came outside unless his house was on fire. The ambulance driver was getting out of his vehicle now, radio in hand, probably calling for backup or a supervisor. Every second that ticked by was another second stolen from Jake's life. I thought about pushing past Karen, thought about physically moving her car myself, but I knew that's what she wanted. She wanted me to lose control, to give her ammunition for whatever twisted game she was playing. "You know what's funny, Karen?" I said, walking closer to her, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. 3 months ago, when Jake had his first heart attack, you weren't here. You were in Florida, visiting your sister. And you know what happened? The entire neighborhood came together. Mrs. Chen brought soup. The Parkinsons drove me to the hospital every day for 2 weeks. Charlie Peterson mowed my lawn without being asked. I stopped just close enough that she had to look up at me. But now you're back, and suddenly we're all enemies again. Her camera phone wavered slightly. "This isn't personal, Mr. Thompson. This is about community standards and—" "Community?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, you wouldn't know community if it bit you on your perfectly manicured behind." I turned to address the growing crowd of neighbors. "Folks, my son is having a heart attack right now. He might die while we're standing here, arguing about property lines and association rules. Is this really who we want to be?" Charles Martinez, a retired teacher who'd always seemed reasonable, stepped forward from his porch. He was wearing a bathrobe and slippers, his gray hair uncombed, but his voice was clear and steady. "Karen, for God's sake, move your car. This is insane." But Karen wasn't backing down. If anything, the attention seemed to energize her. "Charles, you of all people should understand the importance of rules and procedures. If we make exceptions for everyone who claims to have an emergency, where does it end? Next week it'll be someone moving furniture, claiming they need emergency access. The week after that, it'll be a pizza delivery claiming they're rushing medicine to a sick child. That's when I saw Lisa Rodriguez approaching from across the street. Lisa worked for social services, and she'd helped me navigate Jake's disability benefits after his first heart attack. She'd sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and filling out forms, telling me how sorry she was about Jake's condition. I thought she was coming to help, thought she was going to talk sense into Karen. Instead, she walked straight up to Karen and nodded. "You're absolutely right to be cautious," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We can't verify the legitimacy of this emergency without proper documentation. For all we know, this could be staged." She looked directly at me. I've seen people fake medical emergencies to circumvent association rules before. The words hit me like a physical blow. Staged? My son was dying, and she thought I was staging it? I felt the crowd's energy shift, felt doubt creeping into the faces of my neighbors. Suddenly, I wasn't a desperate father trying to save his son. I was a potential fraud, a rule breaker who might be manipulating the system. The paramedic was back at his ambulance, speaking urgently into his radio. Through the open door of my house, I could hear Jake calling for me, his voice weaker now, more desperate. The sound cut through everything else, through Karen's lecturing, through Lisa's accusations, through the whispers of my neighbors. It was the sound of my boy slipping away while I stood helpless in my own driveway. I looked at Karen, really looked at her, and for a moment I saw something beyond the righteous anger and petty authority. I saw fear. She was terrified of losing control, terrified that if she backed down now, her carefully constructed kingdom would crumble, and that fear was worth more to her than my son's life. The ambulance radio crackled with static and urgent voices. Time was running out, and I was standing in the middle of a suburban street, barefoot and powerless, watching my neighborhood turn against me while my son fought for his life just 30 yards away. Everything I thought I knew about my community, about the people I'd lived next to for 15 years, was dissolving like sugar in rain. The standoff stretched into its 5th minute, and I could feel Jake's life slipping away with each tick of my watch. The paramedic had given up trying to reason with Karen and was now setting up his equipment on the street, preparing to carry his gear the 100 yards to my house. His partner, a woman with graying hair and steady hands, was already jogging toward my front door with a medical bag that looked impossibly heavy. "This is ridiculous," Charles Martinez said again, but his voice lacked conviction now. Lisa's accusations had planted seeds of doubt, and I could see them taking root in the faces around me. Mrs. Chen had retreated into her house. The Parkinsons were whispering to each other behind their screen door. Even Charlie Peterson, who'd mowed my lawn without being asked, was studying me with suspicious eyes. Karen sensed the shift in momentum and pressed her advantage. "People, we have protocols for a reason. Last month, someone in Clearwater Springs claimed their grandmother was having a stroke just to get emergency access for a furniture delivery. The week before that, a man in Riverside Heights faked a heart attack to avoid getting a parking violation. We cannot let our community standards be undermined by people who think the rules don't apply to them." I wanted to scream at her, wanted to grab her by her perfectly pressed collar and shake some sense into her, but I knew that's exactly what she was waiting for. One wrong move, one moment of lost control, and she'd have everything she needed to paint me as the villain in this twisted story. The female paramedic emerged from my house, her face grim. She jogged back to her partner and spoke in low, urgent tones. I caught fragments. "Blood pressure dropping. Need the gurney. Can't wait much longer." My stomach twisted into knots as I watched them debate whether to waste precious time carrying equipment or find another way to reach Jake. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Karen wasn't just blocking my driveway anymore. She'd positioned herself strategically, with her phone camera capturing not just me, but the entire scene. She was documenting everything, building a case, creating evidence for whatever complaint she planned to file with the association. This wasn't about rules or protocols. This was about power, and she was using my son's medical emergency as an opportunity to destroy me. "You know what, Karen?" I said, my voice carrying across the crowd. "You want documentation? Let me give you some documentation." I pulled out my own phone and started recording. Everyone can see what's happening here. My son is having a heart attack, and this woman is literally blocking emergency medical access to our home. This is being recorded, it's being witnessed, and everyone here will remember exactly who chose property lines over human life. Karen's confidence wavered for just a moment, but Lisa stepped in to support her. "Recording this interaction could be seen as intimidation," Lisa said, her social worker training evident in her calm, authoritative tone. "And frankly, Mr. Thompson, your aggressive behavior is only reinforcing our concerns about your compliance with community standards." Aggressive behavior? I was standing in my own driveway, barefoot and desperate, while my son fought for his life. But somehow, in the twisted logic of Homeowner Association politics, I was the aggressor. The crowd was growing larger now. More neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by the sirens and the shouting. I recognized most of them, people I'd barbecued with, people whose packages I'd signed for when they were out of town, people who'd borrowed my lawnmower and invited me to their kids' birthday parties. But now they were looking at me like I was a stranger, like I was some kind of threat to their peaceful suburban existence. "Please," I said, and I hated how my voice cracked on that single word. "Please just move your car. Jake is 22 years old. He survived Afghanistan. He survived his first heart attack. He doesn't deserve to die because of a property dispute." "Nobody's dying," Karen said dismissively. "You're being dramatic. If this were a real emergency, the paramedics would have protocols for this situation." That's when the female paramedic spoke up, her voice cutting through the crowd noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "Ma'am, this young man's condition is critical. His heart rhythm is irregular, his blood pressure is dangerously low, and every minute we delay treatment increases his risk of cardiac arrest. This is not a drill. This is not a fake emergency. And if he dies because we couldn't get our equipment to him in time, you will have blood on your hands." The words hung in the morning air like smoke from a house fire. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even Karen seemed to realize the gravity of what was happening, but then Lisa whispered something in her ear, and Karen's resolve hardened again. "I'm sorry," Karen said, though her tone suggested she was anything but. "But I have a responsibility to this community. We can't abandon our principles every time someone claims to have an emergency. The paramedics can walk their equipment to the house. It's not that far." I watched the paramedics exchange another look, watched them calculate distances and weights and precious seconds. The male paramedic was young and strong, but their equipment was heavy and bulky. The heart monitor alone weighed 40 pounds. The defibrillator, the oxygen tank, the medication bag. It would take multiple trips and time Jake didn't have. That's when I saw him. Charlie Peterson, 83 years old and built like a scarecrow, walking slowly across his front yard toward Karen's car. He moved with the deliberate pace of a man who'd lived through the Great Depression and 2 wars, a man who'd seen enough to know the difference between what mattered and what didn't. "Charlie," Karen called out, "please don't interfere with official association business." Charlie ignored her completely. He walked around to the driver's side of her Honda, looked in the window, then looked back at Karen. "Keys in the ignition," he announced to nobody in particular. "Don't you dare," Karen said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Charlie opened the car door and got behind the wheel. The engine started with a quiet purr, and slowly, deliberately, he backed the Honda out of my driveway and parked it on the street. Then he got out, closed the door, and walked back toward his house without saying another word to anyone. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The paramedics didn't waste time gloating. They immediately began moving their ambulance up my driveway, unloading equipment with practiced efficiency. But I knew this wasn't over. I could see it in Karen's eyes, in the set of her jaw, in the way she was already pulling out her phone to make calls. Charlie Peterson had just declared war on the Homeowner Association, and they would make him pay for it. They would make all of us pay for it. As the paramedics disappeared into my house, I heard Jake's voice calling for me again, stronger now, more hopeful. But underneath that relief was a growing dread. Karen had been publicly humiliated, her authority challenged in front of the entire neighborhood. She wouldn't forget this. She wouldn't forgive this. And she had the full weight of the association bureaucracy behind her. I looked around at my neighbors, at the faces of people I'd thought I knew, and realized that everything had changed. The battle lines had been drawn, and there was no going back. Whatever came next, it was going to be war. The paramedics worked on Jake for 23 minutes. I counted every second, standing in my living room doorway, watching them stabilize his heart rhythm and get him ready for transport. His color was better, his breathing steadier, but the fear in his eyes hadn't completely faded. "Dad," he whispered as they loaded him onto the gurney, "what's going to happen to Charlie?" That was my boy. Even while fighting for his life, he was worried about the old man who'd saved him. "Don't worry about Charlie," I told him, squeezing his hand. "Just focus on getting better." But I was worried about Charlie. As the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, I could see Karen pacing back and forth in front of her house, phone pressed to her ear. She was making calls, lots of calls, and I had a sinking feeling I knew what they were about. The crowd had mostly dispersed, neighbors retreating to their houses with uncomfortable expressions and whispered conversations. Only Charlie remained, standing in his front yard, hands in his pockets, watching the ambulance disappear around the corner. I walked over to him. "Charlie, I don't know how to thank you." He shrugged. "Nothing to thank me for. Boy needed help. Woman was being unreasonable. Simple as that." He paused, studying Karen, who was still on her phone. "Though I suspect we're about to pay for it." He was right. Over the next 3 days, while Jake recovered in the hospital, Karen launched what could only be described as a campaign of bureaucratic terror. Charlie received a formal notice of violation for unauthorized vehicle operation on association property. I got hit with a retroactive fine for failure to maintain proper emergency access documentation. Even the paramedics received a complaint letter questioning their failure to follow proper protocols for disputed property access. But Karen made one crucial mistake, as she didn't know about Jake's condition, didn't understand what she was really dealing with. My son hadn't just survived Afghanistan, he'd been a combat medic. And combat medics have friends, lots of friends, the kind of friends who don't appreciate it when someone nearly kills one of their own over a property dispute. On the 4th day, while Jake was still in intensive care, I got a call from Tommy Rodriguez. No relation to Lisa, just an unfortunate coincidence of names. Tommy had served with Jake in Kandahar, and he'd heard about what happened through the veteran grapevine that somehow reaches everywhere and knows everything. "Hey, Mr. Thompson," Tommy said, his voice carrying that familiar military directness. "Heard some woman tried to kill Jake over a parking spot." It wasn't quite that simple, I started to explain, but Tommy cut me off. "Doesn't matter how simple it was. What matters is Jake's alive, and she's not in jail, which means the system failed. So we're going to fix the system." I didn't ask what he meant. With military people, sometimes it's better not to know the details in advance. The fix came on Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after Karen had blocked my driveway. I was at the hospital with Jake. He was finally off the heart monitor and complaining about the food, which the doctors said was a good sign, when my phone started buzzing with calls from neighbors. The first call was from Mrs. Chen. "Mr. Thompson, there are trucks in your neighborhood, military trucks." The second call was from Charles Martinez. "There's some kind of convoy parked in front of Karen's house, men in uniforms." The third call was from Charlie Peterson, and he was laughing so hard he could barely speak. "You need to get down here, Jim. You need to see this." I left Jake with a promise to bring him real food later and drove home to find the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. Parked in front of Karen's house were 3 vehicles, a medical transport truck, an Army surplus ambulance, and a Humvee with a sign that read, Mobile Emergency Response Unit, Veteran Support Network. Tommy Rodriguez was standing in my driveway, wearing combat fatigues and a grin that could have powered the entire neighborhood. Around him were a dozen other veterans, all in uniform, all carrying clipboards and official-looking documents. "What's all this?" I asked, though I was starting to understand. "Emergency preparedness drill," Tommy said, his voice carrying across the entire street. "See, after what happened last week, we realized this neighborhood has a serious problem with emergency access. So, we're conducting a comprehensive survey of all potential obstacles to life-saving medical intervention." Karen emerged from her house, her face flushed with indignation. "You can't park those vehicles here without association approval." Tommy turned to her with the kind of smile that predators wear when they've cornered their prey. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Rodriguez with the Veterans Emergency Response Network. This is a federal emergency preparedness assessment. We're evaluating potential threats to emergency medical access in residential areas." He held up an official-looking document. "We have full authority to conduct this survey, and any interference with our activities could be considered obstruction of federal emergency protocols." It was beautiful. The document probably wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, and the Veterans Emergency Response Network probably consisted of Tommy and his drinking buddies, but Karen didn't know that. All she saw were uniforms and official paperwork and the kind of bureaucratic machinery that she'd spent years using to torment her neighbors. "This is harassment," she stammered. "No, ma'am," Tommy replied politely. "Harassment is blocking an ambulance when someone's having a heart attack. This is a safety inspection." He turned to his team. "Make sure you document every potential access violation. Pay special attention to vehicles parked in positions that could impede emergency response." For the next 4 hours, Tommy and his team conducted the most thorough emergency access survey in the history of suburban America. They measured distances, took photographs, interviewed neighbors, and filled out form after form after form. And through it all, Karen stood on her front lawn, growing redder and more frustrated with each passing minute. The coup de grace came when Tommy approached her with a clipboard. "Ma'am, we need to document your vehicle registration and verify your authorization to park in this emergency access zone." "Emergency access zone?" Karen sputtered. "This is my driveway." "According to our survey, any area within 50 feet of a residence with a documented cardiac patient is classified as an emergency access zone. Unauthorized vehicles in these zones pose a significant threat to life safety." Tommy's voice was completely professional, completely reasonable, and completely devastating. "We'll need to see your emergency access permit." "I don't have an emergency access permit because there's no such thing." Tommy made a note on his clipboard. "Failure to possess required emergency access documentation. That's a serious violation, ma'am." The whole thing was ridiculous, of course, but it was exactly the kind of ridiculous bureaucratic nightmare that Karen had been inflicting on the rest of us for years. The only difference was that now she was on the receiving end, and she didn't like it one bit. By the time Tommy and his team packed up their equipment and drove away, Karen was a broken woman. She'd spent the entire day being subjected to the same kind of petty, arbitrary authority that she'd been wielding over the neighborhood. She'd been measured, documented, questioned, and cited for violations of rules that didn't exist by people who had no real authority. But here's the thing about bullies. They only pick on people who can't fight back. When they encounter someone who knows how to play their game better than they do, they fold like a house of cards. Karen moved out of the neighborhood 3 weeks later. She never said goodbye, never acknowledged what had happened, just packed up her perfectly manicured life and disappeared. The Homeowner Association tried to find a replacement for her, but somehow nobody wanted the job. Funny how volunteer positions become less attractive when people realize they come with actual responsibility. Charlie Peterson never got another violation notice. Neither did I. In fact, the association seemed to lose interest in enforcing most of their rules after Karen left. Maybe they realized that some things, like human decency, like neighborly concern, like the simple understanding that life is more important than lawn care regulations, can't be legislated. Jake made a full recovery, by the way. He's back in school now, studying to become a paramedic himself. He says he wants to help people the way those two paramedics helped him, the way Charlie helped him, the way Tommy and his friends helped all of us. And me? I learned something important that week. I learned that real community isn't about rules and regulations and property values. It's about people who are willing to move a car when a life is on the line. It's about neighbors who know the difference between what's legal and what's right. It's about friends who show up when you need them, even if they have to travel 1,000 miles and pretend to be federal agents to do it. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or committees or official channels. Sometimes it comes from people who understand that the most important rule of all is the one that says, we take care of each other. And sometimes, just sometimes, the bullies get exactly what they deserve.